They mocked her until she returned, changed.
Richmond, 1823. There were women who feared spinsterhood, women who feared poverty, and women who feared invisibility. But Grace Harlow had already survived all three. She feared only one thing now: returning. For as long as memory allowed, she had believed a single unwavering truth: disappearance is a mercy. Once unseen, one cannot be hurt. It shaped everything: her retreat to the countryside, her careful solitude, her staunch refusal to let Richmond society near her heart again. She was competent in exile, content in her remoteness, impenetrably guarded. Or so she liked to pretend. The morning her modest carriage rolled back onto Richmond's cobbled streets, after 3 deliberate years away, the city air smelled of coal smoke, wet stone, and expensive perfume. But peace, her most hard-won possession, did not greet her at the townhouse door. A solicitor did, and in his leather case a thick stack of documents bearing her late uncle's unmistakable cramped script. Grace took them with a heaviness that belonged more to duty than paper. She broke the seal with steady fingers, exhaled as though pre-mourning whatever complication awaited her, and read, "Miss Harlow, I trust this letter finds you in good health, though I suspect news of my passing has already reached you through more informal channels. I write to inform you that certain properties and debts tied to the Harlow name require your immediate attention. The estate at Richmond must be settled, sold, or salvaged, whichever you deem fit. I fear your father's mismanagement has left matters in a state requiring a steadier hand than his ever possessed. You must return to Richmond. I know you fled that city once, and I know why. But business, my dear, does not care for past humiliations. The estate agent, Mr. Caldwell, will meet you at the townhouse. He expects you within the fortnight. I always thought you were stronger than they gave you credit for. Prove me right. Your uncle, Thomas Harlow." When she finished, Grace closed her eyes briefly, jaw tightening as though bracing against an oncoming storm. 2 weeks. 2 weeks of walking streets where she'd once been mocked. 2 weeks of risking recognition by those who'd made her name synonymous with unremarkable. 2 weeks of her uncle's posthumous meddling wrapped in the practicality of inheritance law. She folded the letter with the precision of a woman folding away her fear. Invisibility, she murmured to no one, was pleasant while it lasted. Yet miles away, within Richmond's most imposing townhouse, another life was shifting restlessly towards hers. Beckham Carlyle, Duke of Richmond, stood in his study, surrounded by a silence that had long since curdled from peaceful to suffocating. The house on Grosvenor Square gleamed beneath the afternoon light, its marble halls polished to mirror brightness. It was a world of privilege, yes, but not one that suited his spirit. Grace stepped from the carriage onto Richmond's cobblestones with the deliberate care of a woman walking onto a battlefield. 3 years ago, she would have hesitated at this threshold, smoothed her unfashionable gown, prayed to remain unnoticed. 3 years ago, she had been a different creature entirely. "Look at her," Lady Clara's voice had echoed across the Haverford ballroom, crystalline and cruel. "Plain Grace. One would think she'd have the decency to disappear entirely rather than haunt the edges like some pitiful ghost." The laughter had been worse than the words, bright, tinkling, contagious. Grace had stood frozen in her pale muslin, clutching her lemonade as though it might anchor her to the earth. She'd memorized the pattern of the marble floor that night, counting tiles until she could flee without running. Now, Grace's boots struck those same stones with purpose. Her traveling dress was charcoal wool, practical and well-tailored. No frills, no apologies. Her hair, once tortured into fashionable ringlets that never held, was now swept into a simple knot that suggested she had better uses for her time than vanity. Mr. Caldwell awaited her at number 12, documents spread across the drawing-room table like accusations. The property was worse than her uncle's letter had implied. Debts layered upon debts, tenants unpaid, repairs neglected. She studied the figures with the focus she'd learned managing her country estate, where incompetence meant genuine consequences, not merely social embarrassment. "The house must be sold quickly," Caldwell said, mistaking her silence for distress. "The market is favorable, but you'll need to make yourself available for viewings, negotiations." "I'll handle it." Grace's voice carried the quiet authority of someone who'd learned that confidence, unlike beauty, could be cultivated through sheer determination. "Draw up the paperwork. I want this settled within the month." She would not linger. She would not be seen. She would finish this and disappear again, properly this time. The collision happened at the corner of Harrow Street and Bond, where Grace's practicality met Beckham's entitlement at precisely 11 o'clock. She'd been walking with purpose, mind calculating the cost of roof repairs, when a wall of expensive wool and masculine presumption stepped directly into her path. Grace stopped. She did not step aside. Beckham, Duke of Richmond, was accustomed to the world parting before him like water before a ship's bow. This woman, dressed unfashionably, carrying what appeared to be account ledgers of all things, simply stood there, one eyebrow raised in polite inquiry, as though he were an unexpected obstacle rather than Richmond's most eligible bachelor. "I beg your pardon," he said, deploying the smile that had weakened countless knees. It was a good smile, practiced in mirrors, devastating in ballrooms. "Then beg," Grace replied, her tone suggesting she'd wait precisely 5 more seconds before walking around him. Beckham blinked. Women did not. This simply did not. "I'm afraid you're blocking the pavement," she continued, shifting her ledgers to her other arm with the impatience of someone who'd counted the cost of wasted time. "If you've concluded your begging, I have an appointment to keep." Something ignited in Beckham's chest, unfamiliar and sharp. Irritation? No. Interest, the kind he'd stopped expecting to feel 3 seasons ago, when debutantes had blurred into an indistinguishable mass of simpering ambition. "You don't recognize me." It wasn't a question. It was a novel experience. "Should I?" Grace met his gaze with the steady indifference of someone who genuinely never considered him important enough to memorize. "Are you someone's footman? You're rather well dressed for it, but one never knows these days." For the first time in years, Beckham laughed, a real laugh, startled from him like a cough. By the time he'd recovered, she was already walking away, ledgers tucked efficiently under her arm, leaving him standing alone on the corner like a man who'd just been robbed and couldn't quite determine what had been taken. Beckham had never pursued anything in his life. Things came to him, titles, wealth, women who positioned themselves in his path like flowers angling towards sunlight. Yet here he was, inventing transparently absurd reasons to frequent Harrow Street.
"Your Grace," Mr. Caldwell said, confusion evident as Beckham examined number 12's crumbling facade for the 3rd time that week. "I wasn't aware you had interest in purchasing—" "Merely evaluating neighborhood investments," Beckham lied smoothly. "One must stay informed." Grace emerged from the servants' entrance, sleeves rolled to her elbows, a smudge of dust across her cheek. She looked gloriously undignified and entirely unbothered by his presence. "Still lost?" she asked, not breaking stride toward the waiting cart loaded with broken furniture. "I'm considering the property next door." "No, you're not." She hefted a chair onto the cart with competent efficiency. "That house sold last month to a widow with 6 children. Unless you're planning to offer her twice its value out of spite, you're wasting both our time." "Perhaps I'm simply enjoying the scenery." Grace finally looked at him properly, assessment cool and dismissive. The scenery is crumbling plaster and rotted wood. If that's what the Duke of Richmond finds stimulating, his reputation is vastly overstated. She knew who he was, had known all along. Somehow that was worse. He tried a different approach the next day, arranging to be at the same modiste, the same bookseller, the same tea room. Each time, Grace treated him with the distant politeness reserved for particularly persistent salesmen. "Why do you dislike me?" he finally asked, cornering her outside the solicitor's office. Grace's laugh was brief and humorless. "I don't dislike you, Your Grace. I don't think of you at all. Now, if you'll excuse me, some of us have actual work to complete." She disappeared into the building, leaving Beckham standing in the street, experiencing rejection for the first time in his privileged life and finding it absolutely intoxicating. The storm arrived with biblical conviction, turning Richmond's streets into rivers within minutes. Grace had been inspecting the property's stables when the sky opened, and now she stood trapped in the musty tack room, watching sheets of rain obliterate the world beyond the doorway. Dreadful timing! She whirled. Beckham stood in the shadows, equally soaked, his expensive coat ruined and his carefully styled hair plastered to his forehead. He looked almost human. "Were you following me?" Grace demanded. "I was walking. The storm doesn't discriminate based on title." He moved deeper into the room, away from the driving rain. "We're stuck here until it passes." Grace turned back to the window, determined to ignore him, but the silence stretched uncomfortable, and he, apparently, had never learned the value of keeping quiet. "What were you looking at so intently before the rain started?" "The stalls." The words escaped before she could stop them. "They're structurally sound, but the dividers are wrong, too narrow. Horses need space to feel secure, not caged. Whoever designed these cared more about quantity than quality of life." "You know horses." "I know confinement." Grace caught herself, but the crack had appeared. "In the country, I managed the estate stables, thoroughbreds mostly. One learns quickly that a horse given proper space and respect will outperform a dozen kept in gilded cages." Beckham moved closer, genuinely listening. "That sounds like more than stable management. It's practical philosophy." Grace's voice gained heat, the passion she'd kept leashed, finally straining free. "Everyone assumes value comes from appearance, bloodlines, beauty, polish. But I've seen common-bred horses with proper training outrun champions bred for prettiness. Potential isn't always visible to those who only know how to look at surfaces." The rain drummed against the roof. Beckham stared at her as though seeing something entirely new. "You're remarkable," he said quietly. Grace's armor snapped back into place. "Don't." Lady Clara's voice carried across the modiste showroom with its usual crystalline precision. "Beckham, darling, you've been positively haunting the neighborhood. One might think you've developed an interest in... what was it?" Her laugh tinkled like breaking glass. "Oh, yes, number 12 Harrow Street." Beckham, selecting gloves he didn't need, barely glanced up. "Business investments, Clara, hardly scandalous." "Business?" Clara's smile sharpened. "How fascinating. I wasn't aware you conducted business with women of such modest circumstances, though I suppose even plain Grace Harlow must occasionally venture into society to settle her unfortunate family debts." The name landed like a stone in still water. Grace Harlow. Beckham's memory stuttered, rewound. 3 years ago, the Haverford ball, a girl in pale muslin, standing alone near the refreshments, so thoroughly ignored she might have been furniture. He'd walked past her twice that night without a glance, his attention on Clara's circle, on their laughter, on plain Grace. One would think she'd have the decency to disappear entirely. He'd been there,
not laughing, perhaps, but complicit in his silence, part of the machine that crushed her. And now she'd returned, not plain, not powerless, but forged into something stronger by the very fire they'd used to burn her away. She thought he was mocking her still, thought his attention was cruelty wearing a different mask. She thought he was the enemy, because he had been. "Excuse me," Beckham said, leaving the gloves unpurchased, Clara's confusion trailing behind him like perfume. He had amends to make, but apologies, he suspected, would mean nothing to a woman who'd learned to trust only actions. Will Grace allow Beckham past her carefully constructed walls? Or will old wounds prove too deep to heal? Continue watching to find out. The package arrived at number 12 without fanfare. A simple wooden box. No card, no explanation. Grace opened it warily, expecting some elaborate courtship gift, jewelry perhaps, or hothouse flowers chosen by a servant. Inside lay a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with detailed architectural sketches and notes, stable designs, dozens of them from across Europe, each annotated with measurements, materials, philosophies of horse welfare. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the observations were meticulous. Tucked inside the front cover, a single note in different script, bolder, less careful. "You said potential isn't always visible to those who only know how to look at surfaces. I'm trying to learn to see properly. B." Grace's hands trembled slightly as she turned the pages. This wasn't a gift chosen to impress. This was proof someone had listened. When Beckham appeared at her door the next morning, she almost didn't recognize him. No elaborate cravat, no polished veneer of ducal superiority. Just a man in simple riding clothes, holding his hat in both hands like a nervous suitor. "I owe you an apology," he said before she could speak. 3 years ago, I was at the Haverford Ball. I saw what happened. I said nothing. I did nothing. I was part of your pain through my cowardice, and I cannot undo that." Grace's throat tightened. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I want you to know that what I feel—" He stopped, searched for honesty. "I'm trying to learn to see properly. I'm not chasing a mystery or a challenge. I'm chasing the woman who rebuilt herself from ashes and somehow retained the fire." "You terrify me. You fascinate me. And I would very much like the chance to know you properly, if you'll permit it." For the first time in 3 years, Grace felt hope unfurl in her chest, like something dangerous and fragile. "One chance," she whispered. "Don't waste it." The whispers began subtly, as poison always does. "I heard she returned because of debts, gambling, they say. 3 years in the country, one wonders what she was really fleeing. Beckham's been seen with her. Surely it's mere amusement. He could never seriously consider someone so plain." Lady Clara orchestrated the campaign with the precision of a general deploying troops. A word here, a raised eyebrow there, strategic silence when Grace's name arose in conversation. She'd perfected the art of destroying reputations 3 years ago. Now she simply sharpened familiar weapons. Grace heard the whispers. Of course she did. Richmond's society was an echo chamber designed to ensure no cruelty went unheard by its target. "They're talking again," she told Beckham during their afternoon ride, voice carefully neutral. "Perhaps you should reconsider our association, your reputation." "My reputation," Beckham interrupted, "was built on doing nothing of consequence while looking decorative. I'm rather hoping to demolish it." But Grace saw the tension in his jaw, the way his friends had grown distant, their greetings cooler. She was costing him something. She'd always known she would. When the invitation to the Marchmont ball arrived, cream cardstock, gilt edges, Clara's triumph embedded in every elegant letter form, Grace held it like evidence of her own foolishness. "Don't go," Beckham said when she showed him. "You owe these people nothing." "I owe myself closure." Grace folded the invitation with steady hands. "I ran before. I won't run again. I'll attend, hold my head high, and leave Richmond knowing I faced them."
"Then I'll be beside you." "No." Her voice was gentle but final. "This is something I must do alone. I need to prove to myself that I don't need rescuing." Beckham wanted to argue. She saw it war across his features. But he was learning, finally, to listen. "One dance," he bargained. "Promise me one dance before you leave." Grace smiled, sad and certain. One dance. The Marchmont ballroom glittered with malicious anticipation. Grace felt it the moment she entered, hundreds of eyes tracking her movement, conversations pausing mid-syllable, the collective held breath of a crowd awaiting spectacle. She dressed carefully, not in pale, apologetic muslin, but deep emerald silk that made no apologies for existing. Her mother's pearls at her throat, armor and memorial both. Lady Clara held court near the orchestra, resplendent in cream and diamonds, surrounded by her usual admirers. When she spotted Grace, her smile could have cut glass. "Miss Harlowe," Clara's voice carried beautifully, designed to reach every corner. "How brave of you to return. I was just telling Lord Pembroke about your previous visit to Richmond. Do you remember? 3 years ago?" Her laugh tinkled through the silence. "You were wearing that dreadful pale gown, standing by the lemonade like a lost ghost. What was it I said? Oh yes, plain Grace, haunting the edges." The room held its breath. Grace felt the old humiliation rise like bile, the instinct to flee, to disappear, to confirm every terrible thing they believed about her worthlessness. Her hands trembled. 3 years of rebuilt confidence threatened to shatter like dropped crystal. "I remember," Grace said quietly, voice steady despite the earthquake inside her. "I remember every word, every laugh, every person who looked away and pretended not to see cruelty happening before their eyes." She met Clara's gaze directly. "I also remember leaving that night convinced I was everything you said I was, unremarkable, forgettable, unworthy. It took me 3 years to understand the truth." The silence deepened, anticipatory. "The truth," Grace continued, "is that unremarkable was never my flaw. It was your excuse, your justification for cruelty, and I'm done accepting it." Then Beckham was there, crossing the ballroom floor like a man walking through water. Beckham had promised to let Grace face this alone. He'd lasted exactly 4 minutes before breaking that promise spectacularly. He stopped before her, ignoring Clara's sharp intake of breath, ignoring the whispers rippling through the crowd like wind through grain. He saw only Grace, chin raised, hands steady now, eyes bright with something between defiance and tears. "May I have this dance?" he asked, loud enough for the room to hear. "Beckham," Clara hissed, "surely you're not—" "I'm asking Miss Harlowe to dance." He didn't look at Clara. "Miss Grace Harlowe, the most remarkable woman in Richmond, the only person here brave enough to name cruelty when she sees it, the only person I've met in 3 years of insufferable balls who speaks truth instead of flattery." Grace's breath caught. "You don't have to." "I'm not rescuing you," Beckham said quietly, "just for her. I'm choosing you. There's a difference." He turned then, addressing the room with the ducal authority he'd always possessed but never properly deployed.
For years, I've watched this society reward artifice and punish authenticity. I've participated in it through silence. I was there 3 years ago when Miss Harlowe was mocked for being genuine in a room full of performance. I said nothing. I was a coward. His voice carried steel now. I'm done being a coward. If Richmond cannot see Miss Harlowe's worth, then Richmond doesn't deserve either of us. He extended his hand to Grace. Will you dance with me? And then, if you're willing, will you leave this place with me? Not in shame, but in the certainty that we've found something far more valuable than their approval. Grace placed her hand in his, felt his fingers close warm and sure around hers. One dance, she said, smiling through tears, and then we leave together. They waltzed across the silent ballroom, Grace's emerald silk swirling, Beckham's hand steady at her waist. When the music ended, they walked toward the doors hand in hand, leaving scandal and whispers behind like shed skin. Outside, the night air smelled of freedom. 6 months later, the country estate looked nothing like Richmond's polished marble halls. The house was old stone and climbing ivy. The stables Grace had redesigned herself, built to her exact specifications, spacious, airy, perfect. Beckham stood in the doorway watching his wife argue with the stable master about proper feed ratios, her sleeves rolled up, hair escaping its pins, completely unself-conscious and absolutely radiant. "Your Grace," the stable master said, catching sight of Beckham, "perhaps you could convince the Duchess—" "Never," Beckham interrupted cheerfully. "I married her specifically because she's unconvincible. Besides, she's usually right." Grace turned, caught his eye, smiled that private smile reserved only for him. They'd married quietly, scandalously fast by society standards. Richmond had been appropriately shocked. Clara had taken to her bed for a week. The gossip had been spectacular. Beckham had never been happier.
"The mare foaled last night," Grace called to him. "A filly. Strong legs, good temperament. I thought we might name her Remarkable." "Perfect," Beckham said, crossing the yard to kiss his wife properly, scandal and propriety be damned. They'd found each other in the wreckage of society's cruelty and built something society could never touch. A partnership of equals, a love based on truth rather than performance. A life measured not in titles or approval, but in horses, arguments, laughter, and fierce, unshakable choice. Behind them, the estate stretched green and wild, a world away from ballrooms and whispers. They'd disappeared from society together, and they'd never been more visible to each other. If this story touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Comment below with your favorite moment. Was it Grace's courage or Beckham's transformation? Subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story about characters who choose love over approval. And please share this with someone who needs a reminder that the unremarkable ones are often the most extraordinary. Your support means everything.